The second shadow. There was a man who woke one morning to find he had an extra shadow. He discovered it not in the sharp light of noon, but in the hazy half-dark of dawn, when the world was still soft with ambiguity. He stood before the mirror, and there it was, draped across his shoulders like a second, silent overcoat, while his ordinary shadow lay properly flat on the floor. He turned, and the second shadow turned with him, but just a heartbeat slower, as if it had a mind that took a moment to follow. His first instinct was to step into brighter light, to let the sun burn away the illusion. But under the bare bulb in the kitchen, the second shadow only grew sharper. It pooled at his feet, a faithful twin, never speaking, never reaching, just witnessing. He could feel its attention on the back of his neck like a cold breath that never warmed. At first he reasoned with it. He sat down in a chair, folded his hands, and spoke aloud. "I know you're there. What do you want?" The shadow said nothing. He tried to think at it, to barrage it with a wall of deliberate thoughts, mathematical sums, remembered poetry, a deliberately embarrassing memory, hoping to bore it or shame it away. But the act of thinking only seemed to make the second shadow more present. It drew a little tighter around his temples, as if it fed not on the content of his thoughts, but on the act of thinking itself. The tool of his mind, he realized with a chill, was the very door it had entered. He sought help. He went to a doctor who found nothing, and to a wise woman who squinted and said she could see only one shadow. But there was, perhaps, a faintness about him, a transparent second outline that hurt her eyes if she looked too long. She gave him herbs to make his sleep heavy, but in the deepest dark of the drugged night, the second shadow lay coiled inside his own shadowless body, a dark twin in the negative space of unconsciousness. When he woke, it was still there. He tried to outrun it. He moved to a city of perpetual neon, hoping the chaos of overlapping lights would dissolve the distinction between his two silhouettes. But the second shadow learned the city's rhythms faster than he did. It would stretch behind him in the subway, a long, patient smear, or flatten itself against the wall of his apartment like a listening silhouette cut from midnight paper. No one else saw it. No one else felt the weight of that silent, constant observation. He grew thin and quiet, his own voice strange to him, because every word he spoke had an audience of one that never clapped, never heckled, never gave a sign it had heard. The thought that broke him was not a dramatic one. It was, as he put it later, mere a thought, a tiny, irreducible pebble of a thought. I am being watched from the inside. No named watcher, no conspiracy, no motive, just a pure, hollow observation about his own experience. The second shadow was nothing more than the thought's visual echo. It did not laugh at his pain, did not whisper temptations, did not make demands. It simply denied to resolve. He could not argue it away, because every counterthought was instantly, silently observed by the very thing he was trying to disprove. He could not ignore it, because ignoring required a privacy he no longer possessed. The intrusion was the silence itself. One evening he stood on a bridge, watching the river drag the city's broken lights downstream. The second shadow pooled at his feet, then trickled over the railing like a spill of dark water, stretching toward the depths. For the first time he understood that the shadow would follow him even here. It would not grant him the privacy of a solitary end. The only way to stop being watched was to stop being, but even that final act would be performed for an audience. And then, standing there with the damp wind on his face, a strange shift occurred. It wasn't a resolution. The thought did not dissolve. The second shadow did not peel away and vanish like a bad dream. But in the utter exhaustion of being perpetually witnessed, he discovered a small, quiet crack in his prison. He realized he could, with tremendous effort, choose to turn his attention elsewhere. Not to fight the watcher, but to gently, deliberately turn the focus of his own mind onto something small and physical. The smoothness of the railing's iron, the smell of the river, the distant sound of a violin playing from a window. He could not reclaim his internal privacy, but he could, moment by moment, build a life that happened in the open, in the presence of the watcher. He began to speak again, knowing he was overhead. He cooked meals for himself, the shadow draped over the countertop like a dark cat. He wrote in a journal, and as he wrote, the thought that he was being read was no longer a horror but a simple, neutral fact, like the weather. The shadow's gaze was unblinking, but he slowly stopped blinking back. He let it watch. He let it witness his small, stumbling acts of living. A man tying his shoes, a man humming a half-remembered tune, a man weeping quietly into his hands for no reason the watcher needed to know. The thought was still there, mere a thought, but the life around it had grown large enough to contain it. Years later, someone asked him why he always seemed a little apart, a little as if he were in two places at once. He smiled, a worn, true smile, and said, "I have a constant traveling companion. He doesn't say much, but he has taught me that a life can be lived even when every secret is known." He reached for his coat, and the second shadow flowed down his arm, patient and perfectly attached. He no longer tried to cut it off. He walked into the evening, two silhouettes merging with the dusk, and if he was never truly alone, he had found that aloneness was not the only thing worth keeping.